maybe we can get some questions today. So had a little bit of a power outage earlier, so everything's a little bit behind at the moment. That's why we're going live a little later. Consistency is a fun game to play in the world of internet, that's for sure. Been doing a recent type of exploration in session with people lately in terms of just really getting into sensation and noticing thought from that particular viewpoint or vantage point, so to speak. And it's been really producing, or we could say, creating a lot of stillness. This experience of transmission is kind of a powerful mutual thing. I was having a conversation with Angelo just last weekend. We had never actually spoken about what we call transmission. That is a really crucial part of actually working with a teacher. Sometimes it can be heady, but underneath the surface, something is felt, and that can be mysterious. While working in this realm of sensational exploration, that transmission tends to increase in amplitude. And that by itself, it's like an exchange of information almost, or a type of intelligence that begins to kind of help with unfolding altogether. So hopefully those of you who come and hang out during these live sessions get a sense of that as well. It's interesting, like we have these layers of experience. We have the content on the surface that tends to be exchanged in words and in that heady space, yet still something underneath the surface that's really unspoken and impossible to pinpoint or objectify seems to be happening. We call that transmission. And transmission isn't from one thing to another thing or one direction to another. It's absolutely mutual experience. It was kind of cool to hear that, oh yeah, transmission is mutual. I was like, oh, okay. I was always feeling that. Just that really kind of ecstatic body sense. The last time we did a little bit of a meditation, the last live, and it was pointing toward that transmission, that felt experience. Transmission can be really palpable in a group. If you go to a retreat or you meditate in a group, it seems to somehow accentuate that experience. The very first time meeting Angelo, upon going into his basement, the transmission was next level, really. And it was that on its own that sent this identity that was lingering over the edge. Really powerful, mysterious stuff there. Sandra, hi. Jennifer's here. Caught you working again. Well, yes. These sessions in the middle of the day, I usually have a little bit of a gap on Wednesdays. Wednesdays are getting more full in other ways at the moment. And that's kind of why it tends to show up on Wednesdays. So for all of you who were able to join, really, really appreciate your presence. Does anybody have questions they'd like to get into? It's a lot more interactive here if you'd like to participate in that way. We can even start with like a Q&A. Here, I haven't played with this feature. Let's see. I'll ask this question. We can talk about obstacles today, actually. One of the favorite pointing questions that tends to arise is what's in the way? Because we have these different layers of interpretation of obstacles and things like that. And if we intellectually or thought-orientedly know what's in the way, That can be a really nice portal to start getting into something. Here's some more suggestion around that too. If the answer to a lot of questions is I don't know, there can be a lot of indication of that too. A sense of complacency or moving away from something. It could also be authentic. It's interesting how these things can show up in different ways and still appear to be the same. It's like it's almost like how some things are the same thing and show up differently. A good example of that is motivation and ambition and complacency or disassociation. Those two experiences are actually predicating themselves off the same thing, something sensational that's uncomfortable. And some people become very busy as a coping mechanism and get really dopamine oriented to create achievements and find objects and build empires and these kinds of things in order to move away from a sense of discomfort. Other people will start kind of checking out and moving into complacency and isolating and these kinds of things. But fundamentally, it's the same exact thing happening there. I don't know can be the same way. I don't know can be a way to check out, to move away from something. So the question, what's in the way? Let's see. Okay, so any thoughts about pain in the body? It hurts everywhere. Not sure if it has anything to do with the process. The pain in the body seems to be kind of challenging for those of us that still experience some sense of existential pain or that more abstract emotional pain. It doesn't have to be this way. Some people have chronic pain anyway in their lives, but it seems like we start exploring the physical pain in a much more earnest and direct way once we have had the clear insight that this existential or emotional pain is imposed with thought. It's imposed with a sense of context. So if you're currently feeling pain now, the pointer would be to move as deeply and fully into the center of whatever that sensation seems to be and see how far you can go if you can find a center. And I can use an anecdotal story. The last time there was a flu, the body was sick. There was a very distinct sensation that was like a throbbing that felt like coming from the bone marrow itself. Just every bone was there was like this pulsing outward. And it was so visceral and so vivid that it felt like it was actually kind of creating a gravitational force of some sort. And attention it was like all of me somehow had moved into the very center of that sensational signal, and it suddenly shifted tone. It became something closer to pleasure, like it started to feel really, really nice. And it was just absolutely resting in the midst of that experience, the exhaustion or whatever it may be, throbbing pain. I know that's probably easier said than done, of course, because I think fundamentally we have this aversion to anything that seems painful for us. It's not quite the same as putting our hand on a hot stove where there's actually some physical degradation happening. Whatever that body reaction is, whatever that experience is, it makes a lot of sense biologically. But a lot of the pain that we experience in terms of, inexplicable pain or throbbing or sharp pains that seem to show up in the body space, those aren't quite the same. I mean, they can be a sign of degradation, but that can also fire up some thought. They tend to be more often associated with just something that's automatically overlaying an interpretation of the experience. When you go into a doctor's office and you're sitting there, when you're finally actually in the exam room or whatever, there's usually a chart on the wall. And it says, explain your pain level. And it has a 1 to 10, and it gives you a little breakdown of what each of those levels are like. There's a clue in that it has to be interpretive because there's no objective way to measure pain. So That will kind of give you a sense. There's actually a lot of science around this too that can kind of be interesting to talk about. Um, here's one. When someone is in the midst of a painful experience, they're actually experiencing some kind of physical pain. It's been shown that if they express themselves outwardly, if they actually cuss, they use curse words, it, it has to be anecdotal. Of course, it's coming from who's reporting, but the experience for people is that they report less pain if they cuss in the midst of feeling pain. That's interesting. There was another experiment they did where they had people hold these brass rods that were connected to wires, and they had them sit in a room, and there was a little screen here that flashed a number from 1 to 10, and whatever that number was supposed to be the shock level. And then they would verbally essentially call out what level of pain they were experiencing in the midst of that experiment. And people would say, I'm feeling a 4, even if it flashed a 3. I'm feeling a 7 if it's an 8, these kinds of things. And at the very end of the experiment, they gathered everyone in a room and told them that there was actually no electric shock going through those brass rods. Instead, there was a little vibrating motor, and it would vibrate. But because of their expectation to feel pain, their experience was that there was pain. There's some clues in this, that there's an anticipatory sense when it comes to pain. If you're noticing something in your body and there's this hesitation or fear or resistance to move into the experience, that will likely increase the perception of pain. There's some clues here around suffering as well. Suffering is never the object of experience, it's the relationship. Suffering comes from the resistance to experience. It's the resistance itself. It's in that gap of relationship. That particular piece there is very interesting. It definitely can take a lot of engagement to have that kind of realization that suffering is never in the sensation. The sensation cannot contain that information. It just defines itself. So it's the interpretation, the game of telephone that's played with the assumptions and the thoughts in the mind, the expectations in the mind. And this is where you're really starting to get into some deep stuff with suffering. But there is this sense of preference around sensation, this I like it, I don't like it. Probably heard that spoken of here. That preference is actually the key part of that word is pre. That essentially the mind is saying we already know something about it before it's even experienced. That right there is belief. That's confirmation bias. That we're literally looking for evidence to support a conclusion. We're literally looking for something to reify our sense of certainty about something. That happens very quickly when it comes to what we're feeling and what we can call a sense of suffering. Yet it's not actually real. It all comes from that anticipatory experience. This also translates a little bit into anything that's anticipatory, that sense of something coming. When Avalon was really young, I used to, tickle her and play in that way. And it didn't take long before there was a realization that if I just came at her with fingers like this and went into the tickle voice, I'm going to get you, like leading into that anticipatory sense that she was going to get tickled, wouldn't even have to be any physical contact. She'd squirm and laugh without any physical contact actually happening there. That shows something around pain too. It lives in the realm of thought. It lives in the realm of interpretation. It lives in the realm of expectation. It lives in the realm of reflection, reflecting on experience and thereby projecting it into a potential future. We start to settle into this artificial sense of certainty, living in some sort of conclusion about what is about to happen. That's not possible. Part of this is to realize that it is not possible to know until we know, or to experience until we experience. So in the midst of that, the pain and the suffering that we're experiencing is all oriented in thought. And by no means is any of this about attempting to deny somebody's experience by any means, not at all. If your experience is of pain, then you are instantly trusted and believed. The encouragement here is to say, well, get more curious, keep investigating. And I think what you'll find is there are just hell no's built into some of these experiences. I find this a lot with people that experience a lot of chronic illness or chronic pain, that there is an absolute certainty that that experience is miserable and it will always be miserable. And I need to find a solution or a cure or something out here. But the thing that tends not to show up is a willingness to directly engage with it. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a sense of sympathy or empathy or compassion that comes along with that, because I know it can be harrowing to be in the midst of just that, all of that intensity of experience all the time. Of course, that creates its own unique challenge, yet it is still the same approach. And in some ways, acute or intense or severe suffering of any sort is actually a gift. Trauma is actually a gift. And I know that might ruffle some feathers, but it is, because it becomes so unignorable, so impossible to disassociate from, that we must immerse. It's just that way. This is why we hear stories of people going through some very intense suffering and having a spontaneous awakening in the midst of that. That can be the gift. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, hi, Sarah. She says, my answer was, this will last forever. Yeah. I mean, it's a conclusion. If you really look at the essence of all belief and how that tends to work, it's a pseudoscience. It's coming to a conclusion before the gathering of evidence. In other words, we're not letting the experience speak for itself. We're in some strange way controlling the experience, no matter what it is, controlling it to suck or controlling it to attempt to make it better in some way for whatever the mind, however it partitions those experiences. To say this will last forever is already making that conclusion. And then what's going to happen is that we must experience within that narrow framework that we've essentially entered into. That all of the experience that's on the periphery, and I know I'm doing this visually because it's just one way to illustrate, but the periphery exists everywhere. It is infinite. There's a periphery to thought, a periphery to sensation, periphery in the vision, a periphery in sound, a periphery that is a place where we cannot pinpoint or objectify the experience, yet it is still there. That is the gap. That is the emptiness right there. That's it. That's the pointing. So what's happening is, when we come up with that conclusion, that expectation, that sense of anticipation, the narrowing of the periphery and the shutting out of the periphery becomes a fixation. The only way to describe this is a fixation. It's a hyper focus, a density of attention, density of thought, obsession, repetitiveness, hamster wheeling. And in the midst of that, by blocking out the rest of what is just always arising here, we miss so much. We just don't perceive it. Sure, it's still occurring, it's still happening, and there's definitely attention with it, yet our perception doesn't allow us to see that. That is what it is to be mind identified. So when the pointings say that whatever the mind wants, it cannot have, that's not intended to be mean, even though it seems kind of mean. Like, you want awakening? You can't have it. Because it's not the mind that wakes up. The mind cannot wake up by design. And you will see a lot of negotiation along the way. You will see it in yourself. You will see it in others. It's seen all the time here, that the negotiation is, well, I can find a magic route to wake this up, but I will not abandon this. There's an addiction to that. There's a desperate codependence in thought. And make no mistake that the primary abuser in our existence is thought itself. You know this to be true. If you sit with your thoughts still and you watch, you will hear those self-judgmental things that are being said by thought. It's not that we're really doing it to ourselves, but if the experience is that I am thought, then I guess you are doing it to yourself in that experience, in that context. You know, the thoughts, I'm not good enough. It's never going to happen for me. I'm worthless. I'm a piece of shit. I hope I die. those particular thoughts right there it's actually being used to essentially beat us down in a way that we become codependent. It's the ego riding in on a white horse after beating us up and saving us. And then when we're on the horse and we're riding out of that battle, it says, see, what would you do without me? I mean, it is inherently gaslighting. That is the primary abuser in our existence. And of course, that manifests itself externally. And by no means is there any discounting to any sort of external abuse you may have experienced. This is not about denying your experience. Like, that really never ever actually makes sense. Whatever your experience is, it's true. But we keep going. There's not this universal truth in the way that the mind perceives it, like an object of truth that we just have to find. It only arises now. You can only know truth in this moment. You cannot expect truth in some future way. You cannot remember truth in some past way. It is only experienced now. And that has infinite portals. The truth of sensation, the truth of thought, the truth of experience really comes down to immersion. The truth in that is that we cannot but be immersed. We cannot but be engaged. It's impossible to be away from. A koan that's come up recently in some conversations is something like, if you go north, south, east, or west, which direction to leave the universe, to exit the universe? And in the resting of that koan, people go, huh? Can't step outside the universe. Can't be away from it. You've probably heard it in other ways too. Wherever you go, there you are. That's vivid too, of course. The universe inside, we could say, no matter where you go, there's sensation present. Know it well. It's the ultimate place of momentum, to realize we are what we feel. To see where something is attempting to reject what we feel, we start to recognize the outside of all suffering. Because this cannot be rejected. It's effortless. It just is. And a lot of sympathy and empathy for people on the in the southeast of the U.S. right now, with the hurricane. But that hurricane that's coming cannot be stopped. That's clear. What's the difference between that and what's being felt? You'll see. And yeah, I mean, I know I'm using this metaphor just because it's arising. People in the midst of preparing for this massive storm that's about to hit the peninsula and maybe, surrounding areas, some people are attempting to hunker down in their houses. They're under the illusion that they can somehow avoid the effects of this storm or, somehow mitigate those kinds of things. But the truth is, the storm's going to hit nonetheless. It's going to cause damage. It's going to take lives. That's the way these things are. These things happen. We have no control. It's the same thing with sensation. It's going to happen anyway. You're feeling it anyway, no matter how disassociated you want to be, no matter how compelling and enticing those thoughts may be. It's still happening. It's still there. And what ultimately starts to occur is a sense of dissonance. A disassociation from ourselves is our disassociation from feeling. That is suffering. That is the crux of shame. That is the crux of separation. And until that is absolutely conferred with, merged with, there will never be a sense of wholeness. You must realize wholeness now, in this now. Realize it, feel it, you feel it. Wholeness is a feeling. Intuition is a sensation. Courage is a sensation. Curiosity is a sensation. Sexuality is sensational. Communication, free expression, creativity, sensational. Giving, sensational. Our authenticity is fundamentally the intelligence of what is felt. Definitely been playing with this for a while, and there's just really no way around this. There's no bypassing it. There's no other way. We must know what is here, and what is viscerally, intimately here and vulnerable is what is being felt. Now notice the effort to move away, to cover, to hide, to distract. You will see that that's where all the energy takes place. People will say, I'm so exhausted from feeling, but it's not the feeling that's exhausting because it's happening anyway. It's the fighting. That's where the exhaustion comes. It's like walking into a rapidly flowing river that's waist deep and digging our feet in and pushing against that current. That's exhausting. But if we allow ourselves to float, it takes a lot less energy to move with what is moving, to be with what is. And then you might even start to experience some differences in sleep. When the brain is using less energy, I mean, biologically speaking, the brain consumes about 25% of our caloric intake. That's a lot. And if we're using that less for resistance, for effort, for these other things, we require less sleep. We seem to heal faster. It's actually remarkable how the body just kind of handles itself. But most human beings in this modern existence are living in a perpetual state of survival and high stress. And while a significant amount of that has been externally conditioned, there is a point where we take it on ourselves. And that is where responsibility lies. We must recognize that. No one is a victim in their experience. They are just responsible in their experience. And all responsibility really looks like, it's not a long-term sense of what I've done and what I will do. Responsibility is just simply, how do I respond now? How do I engage now? How do I immerse now? That's all it is. To live perpetually in that experience of responsibility, that type of deep diving into now, is so free. Immersion is so free. It's this notion of free will, because really, what does free will, what's the subtext of that? Free will is basically saying, I can resist, is what it's saying. I can resist what is. That's ultimately what free will is saying. That's not freedom. Free will is not free. Because in the resistance, that tends to compound itself, it seems. You've probably all had that experience, the compounding resistance, the dominoes. As they lay out, they continue to lay out. It's just resistance and reaction after reaction. As we go out into the world, we probably notice this here and there. You might notice it in your own experience, but it seems like the grand majority of human beings are living in a constant state of reaction. That's as far as they seem to go. And it's really nobody's fault. See, there's a difference between responsibility and blame, of course. It's not anybody's fault, really, but that is just what's appearing. That's how it's showing up. Now we have responsibility once we start to recognize something. That's the beautiful part about insight, actually, is insight gives us opportunity for responsibility, opportunity for engagement, immersion, flow. Chop wood, carry water, the consideration of chopping wood and carrying water, the stepping back, the reflection, the thought, that's resistance. In the midst of chopping wood and carrying water, and we all know this in some aspect of our lives, but in the midst, there is no resistance. There's no one doing it. It just is happening. It's just like that. You might notice in athletic pursuits, some people, when they run, they get that runner's high. They also get that feeling that the body's running. There's no one doing it. That's immersion. That's what immersion feels like. And it shows up in such a variety of ways. Could be while playing music, if you're into that. Could be in the midst of drawing. Whatever seems meditative for you, the pointing is there. There's natural meditation. That it's basically a portal or an experience that helps us absolutely immerse into this. And it's just an assistant. It's just a tool. Yet there is a point as you continue this path and this journey and the playing and the experimentation and the exploration, that this all becomes so effortless that there's no one even to resist any longer. There's no one there. The identity itself is resistance. That's what it is. There is only someone here if there is someone that can say no. If not, we become our environment. How are we not our environment? And now getting into some of the deeper pieces here, looking at global warming, climate change, and all these things. It's the rejection of ourselves that leads to the rejection of our environment. It leads to the rejection of others. It is that sense internally that tends to kind of project itself in this outward engagement kind of way, a sense of controlling others, controlling environment, essentially capitalizing, manipulating, and taking advantage of everything. in a state of control. But what we don't realize is in that state of control, we are completely out of the integrity of our truth. It's cheating. We're cheating. I'm encouraging you not to cheat yourself, not to cheat experience. All of that stepping away, that controlling is based on some sense of protection. We don't need to plan for protection. We don't need to know about it. We don't need to have all these mechanisms around it. If we need to survive, something takes over and we survive. It just happens this way. So many survival stories, people say, I wasn't thinking about it. I don't know. It just happened. I guess I was part of that. I pulled that person out of that car. I wasn't thinking anything. I saw that person about to slip off the edge of that cliff and I just grabbed them. I wasn't thinking about it. These things. This is where trust starts to develop. Even though we don't really need it, trust is kind of a reflective experience. Like, for instance, I don't need to trust hand. It just is. It's moving so directly into what is that there's no need to even reflect, evaluate, justify, compare, contrast. It shows up on its own. This is still so very human and so very practical for us. But kind of going back to the sense of climate change is this environment, this planet, if you will, is just simply reflecting what it is to be in the experience of human beings who are doing everything they can to move away from themselves. And I'll point again, just to kind of clarify this, because I know a lot of this stuff can seem contradictory or confusing. The Dogen quote is really good. We must know ourselves in order to forget ourselves. That's the paradox. It seems to be a primary paradox in our experience. The first step into a fourth dimension of experience, fourth dimensional consciousness, seems to arise in paradox. And who knows where it goes? After that, there seems to be really no knowing beyond that. This three-dimensional experience is a shadow of the consciousness that we are absolutely in tune with. There's nothing wrong with us. It's not quite like that. This is the package we purchased. You know, the Josh character got the struggle a lot as a child, suffer a lot all the way through adulthood, and you know, maybe figure it out at some point package. maybe have a vast opening package. This, even though there seems to be some very real world consequences, ultimately we start to see it's all inconsequential. It's the clay. It's the ubiquitousness of emptiness. We really like to anthropomorphize and dramatize our existence on this planet. It's kind of funny. This little ball of dust, the little faint blue dot, as Carl Sagan said, is just so tiny compared to the vastness of what seems to be here in this experience. The remarkable thing is that going completely in what appears to be and feels like an inward experience, we find all of the out. The vastness is contained, or seems to be contained, feels like it's contained. We go to those densities of experience and sensation, and we become that. And as we become that, there's no more us to negotiate or to evaluate or justify or to resist. Soon that becomes an absolute effortless motion of something that is organic and natural for us. It's actually always occurring. We don't need to put the blinders on all the time. Anyway, no idea where any of this came from or what was really said. Hopefully it's decent enough to put up on the channel. Something about sensation, probably. That's funny. I had no idea. Yeah, and I also just wanted to remind everybody that this is just a really kind of human outpouring in this regard. You don't have to do this alone. I mean, You don't have to do this alone. If you want to reach out, you want to connect, don't let money be an issue. If that seems to be a boundary or some kind of block for you, reach out. Let's sit. Let's do a session for the time being, and let's experience some transmission. Let's experience some presence. Sometimes that's just enough momentum to kind of begin to unfold in these other areas that we tend to compartmentalize in our lives. If it can happen here, it happens everywhere. And yeah, I'm getting a lot of messages, and that's why I'm pointing this out. Is that this is just a response about people feeling like this is too tough to do on their own, so on and so forth. Like, I will walk with you if that means walking into fire, if that means, at the crushing depths of the bottom of the ocean. I will walk with you. It's been done so many times. You don't have to do this alone. And then, there's a point, of course, where it seems to kind of take its own tone, and there's no sense of being apart from, so there's no sense of alone. But in the meantime, if you feel like you are stuck or you don't have that momentum or just something's in the way, let's connect. We'll see what comes up. And for all of you who have continued, obviously, to meet here and be a part of this, thank you so much. So much. I feel such a sense of gratitude just to be involved in this way, just to be just to be this with you. Thank you very much. All right, I'm about to go. Let's see. Wanting to get or even give brings up shame lately, like seeing the manipulation. Yeah. We can get more into that, Sarah. It's the motion away from something that tends to leave a sense of a vacuum. We can just put it that way. And there is no immediate answer to that, like the mind would think. In other words, if I'm feeling hot, all I have to just do is move into the cold. It's actually not always quite like that. In fact, very rarely like that. It seems like both of those motions tend to move away from something else, something a little bit more mysterious, subtle, non-dual. So we can get into that some more too. All right. Anyway, well, no idea how this went. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully it had some value. Appreciate you all so much, and I will look forward to seeing you Wednesday. All right. Bye.